Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming and sharing tonight these reflections on an interesting subject. Most of us, not all of us here, but most of us have been probably raised in a Judeo-Christian tradition, and we are more or less acquainted with the myth of the fallen angels. This myth is actually not in the Bible. There is nowhere in the Bible that the phrase fallen angels can be found. There are a few elements in the Bible that compose this myth that was created later on. There are also some elements in some other books that are not part of the regular Bible, like the book of Enoch. And then some early church fathers developed this myth. Also the idea of Lucifer, for example. Normally this idea of the fallen angels is related to Lucifer, and Lucifer is believed by most people to be Satan. And this is based on a verse in Isaiah where he says, look at you, Lucifer, now you are falling into earth. Where are you that's so powerful? I'm paraphrasing. But scholars have discovered that Lucifer means the light bearer, or the bringer of the light, the bearer of the light. And Lucifer was a nickname that the king of Babylon was using for himself. He was a very proud king, and he was saying, I'm the Lucifer, I'm the one that brings the light. And he was defeated. So Isaiah was saying, you were the bringer of the light, and now you are fallen. As a king. So all these different elements were mixed in this myth. But the truth is that the myth of the fallen angels, in one way or the other, is present in other cultures too. It's a universal myth, as most of the myths that really survive throughout the years. And with slightly different characters, the central topic is, or there are many elements in the central topic that are shared in different traditions. So in the Theosophical explanation of how humanity came into being, there is something that fits with this myth. There is a description in The Secret Doctrine. The Secret Doctrine is a book written by one of the co-founders of the Theosophical Society, Madame Blavatsky. And there is when talking about how humanity appeared on Earth, there is something that explains this myth, but from a different perspective. Something that Blavatsky did when she started the Theosophical movement was to take many of the teachings in the Bible and explain them in a symbolic way. That actually became a very important way of reading the Bible several decades after Blavatsky died. She was the first person in doing this in a more or less systematic way. And many of the myths that we find in the Bible, and I'm using the word myth not necessarily with the connotation that these stories are not true, like when we say, oh, that's just a myth, saying that is just an illusion or a fallacy. I'm using the word myth in a more esoteric way. A myth is an explanation of a universal truth that, because it is put in a symbolic way, it can be applied to many things in nature. The idea is that nature has a set of laws that work on different levels. So if you get to know the basic laws, you can apply those laws to the formation of a planet or the formation of a mosquito. This is Blavatsky talking. She said this, you can see similar patterns in the formation of anything in the universe. So a myth has the ability to take in the form of an allegory, take all these elements and preserve them so that you can apply them on different levels. It's a scientific way of speaking, is very accurate, but the problem is that it can only refer to one particular thing, because it is so accurate that you can explain with certain words how certain molecules work, for example, and those words cannot be applied even to some different sets of molecules many times. It's so accurate that it's also very specific. And if you have to explain how things work, you need many, many explanations, many words, many books. Myths, on the other hand, have the ability to, in one single story, to illustrate how things work on different levels, as I said. And if you have the key to interpret the myths, then you can, by yourself, you can understand how these things work. Madame Blavatsky used to say that there are 7 levels of interpretation for each myth. The myth of the fallen angels can explain how, from an astronomical point of view, how planets are settled around the solar system, how the humanity is born, how the physical humanity, how the spiritual aspect of humanity is developed, and several other levels of reality. She explained a few of them in The Secret Doctrine, and I think that is a good example of how the power behind the myth. So I was saying that Blavatsky explained the meaning of many of the myths in the Bible, and many of these interpretations are actually quite different from the way that normal Christianity would interpret these myths. She claimed that the difference is due to the idea is that when a religion is started, along the time, some interpretations begin to change, because people who are trying to transmit the religion, they have to adapt themselves to the circumstances in which they are, to the prejudice of the culture. You know, right now we have a particular prejudice in our culture. This is accepted, this is not accepted. If you want to spread a religion, and you say things that are not accepted in your culture, then you are not very successful in spreading your religion. So most religions, consciously or unconsciously, they try to adapt their teachings to whatever is acceptable to people there. And that generates certain deformation in the teachings. And then, of course, there is always the problem of political manipulation. We know that in many religions, whoever is in power at the level of the government takes that set of beliefs, because it's easy to manipulate people when you have the religion behind backing you up, just like what is happening in the Middle East right now, for example. And that happened also, unfortunately, in the history of the Western countries in the church and the Christian church. But anyway, this introduction is just to point out that we are going to have an interpretation of the myth of the fallen angels from a point of view that, unless you are already familiar with this, may be even surprising in some aspects. And that is something interesting, because we can have a fresh view at this. So, just to summarize the myth, the idea in Christianity is that there is a group of angels that at some point they became rebellious. They didn't want to obey some commands by God. What these commands were is not clear. In some of the myths, the angels didn't want to worship Adam representing humanity. So God wanted the angels to worship humanity, that was his creation, and some angels regarded humanity as something that was lower, and they didn't want to worship them. They didn't want to be the protectors of humanity. They thought that it was a lower level of creation. So this rebellion made them fall from heaven. And another accounts the rebellion was about power or about different elements that seem to be more human elements than really parts of the myth. But the point is that a group of angels fell from grace and they had to leave heaven, which is normally depicted up there, so they fall into earth. Now another element in the myth is that some angels fell because they were protectors of humanity, but when they saw human beings, especially when they saw the female human beings, some of them fell in love. And then that falling in love and having sexual intercourse with the human beings made them fall into matter, into earth. So again, women are in this myth, the ones that made Adam fall and they made, the angels fall. Of course, if you understand this from a symbolic point of view, in the Gnostics, which were an early Christian group, they had a far more mythological and symbolical interpretation of the Christian story. And for example, I think it's in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, she's depicted there as the most important disciple, and she was a woman. So some of the main disciples were jealous and they were upset. And they asked Jesus, how come that she is a woman and she is more important than us? You love her more than you do us. And then he said, she's a woman, but my teachings will make her man. And that seems something very chauvinistic. But then if you keep reading the Gnostic view, in the Gnostic view, all of us are female, our souls are like, they belong to the female category because the feminine element represents something that is passive, it is nurturing, it is, like the motherhood, but also is what is passive and is receptive. So in the Gnostic view, all of humanity is, at the level of the soul, is female, and it becomes masculine at the level of the soul when the spiritual gnosis, the spiritual wisdom awakens so that the soul becomes actively spiritual. So when the Gnostics used, or some of the groups, the Gnostics were very heterogeneous, but when some of the Gnostics used this female and male representation, they were not talking about gender, they were just talking about some universal principles. So the same with the idea that the angels or Adam fell because of some relationship with women. In that situation, Adam is all of us, male and female, and Eve represents matter. So this is the spirit that begins to be in relation with matter and then falls into matter. So in the case of the angels, the spirits begin to incarnate in matter and fall in love with matter. This is what happens to us. We are all spiritual beings, but when we are incarnated, we forget our origin, we fall in love with things, possessions, with what matter, the sensations that matter can give us, and then we fall. We fall from the state of grace that we have in our true nature. So when talking about male and female, in the esoteric approach, we have to, it's difficult, I know, but we have to disassociate completely the idea of gender with the male and female. We are both male and females in different aspects of our being. But what we are going to explore today is another aspect of the myth, which is the rebellion of the angels, and how that rebellion was very important for humanity. according to the interpretation that Blavatsky has, and this interpretation is based on the stanzas that she wrote, or rather translated, into her book, The Secret Doctrine. She claimed there is a very old book that has a series of stanzas that explain the origin of the universe and human beings. She had access to that book, but she said it's a secret book. Only a community of yogis or enlightened beings that were her masters, her teachers, only these people keep this book, and because she was a disciple of them, she had access to it. And then when she wrote The Secret Doctrine, she translated some of these stanzas that explain the origin of the universe and human beings. So what I'm going to present is some excerpts from these stanzas and explain them. And I wanted to present, since I assume that what I understand is that most people here are members of the Theosophical Society. So I wanted to present, to bring actually the slokas from the Secret Doctrine, so that if you are not familiar with this book, you can get a little familiar by means of this presentation. As you are going to see, in the Secret Doctrine, it's not easy study for several reasons. One of them is that the language is quite symbolic, and also Blavatsky is bringing words from different cultures, because when she had to explain something, many times she said, like the Gnostics said, or like the Hindus said, and used part of their myths to explain the knowledge that is here in the stanza. So you need to know a little of every tradition to be able to understand this. So let us start. There are a series of stanzas that talk about the creation of Earth, some early attempts by nature to create human beings. And Blavatsky says that human or nature, if it is not held by the divine thought, by the divine intelligence, nature herself is not able to generate human beings. All that nature can do is to generate a very good animal. But it is not possible to generate what we call self-consciousness, which is a manifestation of the soul, merely by biological evolution. So in the course of the evolution of the earth, the stanzas show the spirit of the earth, and all this is allegorical but also has some scientific basis. You know, when we talk about the spirit of the earth, the Greeks would talk about Gaia, for example, and or in Hinduism, Bhumi or Prithvi. You know, there is the idea that the planet is not just a bundle of material things, but there is certain consciousness there. So in the earth, in the stanzas, the earth is shown trying to produce human beings and failing to do so. So at a certain point, when the earth was ready for this step, it is said, the Lord of the Lords came. This Lord of the Lords is what the Greeks would call the demiurge. The demiurge is the god that is the creator. In several traditions, there is a difference between the highest god and the creator. The creator is, if we can put it this way, a kind of lower god, which is the hands-on God, which is a manifestation or a representation of the physical forces that generate a planet, that generate the physical evolution. And these physical forces are guided by some kind of intelligence that the Greeks call the demiurge, for example. In the Gnostic view, they regarded the demiurge as a quite low god and as a flawed god, a god that was incomplete, a god that was mistaken. This is because they could not reconcile all the problems that they saw on Earth with the earthquakes and with the problems we have as a culture and all the war and suffering. They could not reconcile the reality of suffering with the idea that an omniscient, omnipotent, all-loving God was the creator. So they would say that this omniscient, all-loving, all-powerful God is not the one that created Earth. Now there are other ways to explain this situation. We don't have time to go into that. But the point here is that the Lord of Lords would be this demiurge, what in the Bible would be, Jehovah or the Creator. If you see in the Genesis, when talking about the creation of the universe, the word used is Elohim. Elohim is a Hebrew word that is a plural word. So normally, because the Judeo-Christian tradition is monotheistic, Elohim is translated in singular. But Elohim doesn't mean God, it means gods. And all the speaking, the gods are saying, let us create earth, let us create heaven. It's always in plural. So Madame Blavatsky says that this is actually referring to a hierarchy of gods that are the ones that create earth, and they are following a higher intelligence that would be the Lord of Lords. So the Lords, in plural, are these forces, these gods that create the earth, and the Lord is the intelligence behind. So at a certain point in the evolution of Earth, when the time was right, then the Lord of Lords came, and this is all allegorical. We can think about this in terms of energies that begin to be activated at different points in time. And it says, from her body, from the Earth's body, he separated the waters, and that was heaven above, the first heaven, which Blavatsky says is the atmosphere, or the air, the firmament. So the first step was to produce an atmosphere where humanity could actually survive. And then the great Chohans, these lords, these creative gods, called the lords of the moon. Now the lords of the moon are a particular hierarchy of angels that will have a certain duty in the creation of human beings, and that we are going to see. So the great Chohans, called the lords of the moon, of the airy bodies. So these are angels that have a body, but it's a subtle body. That's what it means, airy bodies. Remember, all this is allegorical language. And the great Chohans told these angels, bring forth men, they were told, men of your nature. Give them to the divine sparks, which in Theosophy we call the monads. So give them their forms within. In the Theosophical view, our physical body is composed of two aspects, or two dimensions. What we see as dense, that we call is our body, is like the external layer of matter that is organized or is added to a non-physical mold, which we call the etheric double. For example, science doesn't know why a cell in the uterus, for example, the cells an embryo begins to duplicate and to grow, and then the cells naturally arrange themselves in the forms of the organs. If you want to reproduce this in the laboratory, and you put a cell, in a dish, in a petri dish, you will never have like a liver with the form of a liver. You will have a sheet of liver cells. They never, by themselves, organize in a form. If you want to generate an artificial organ, which they are able to do, you have to provide a mold, a silicon mold, around which the cells can can grow. In the Theosophical view, there is a mold in nature. They don't know how the body manages to produce all these forms. In the Theosophical view, there is a mold in nature, which is this etheric double, which is a subtle counterpart of the physical. So what these angels, the angels are obviously not material, so what these angels were going to provide is this inner form, this mold, and then the earth would cover this with flesh. So this is what you see here. Give them their forms within, and she, the Mother Earth, or nature, will build coverings without the external bodies. For male, females will they be, lords of the flame also. What Blavatsky explains is that humanity at the beginning of evolution was hermaphrodite or androgynous, meaning the two genders were together. And this is also one of the debates in the Bible, because it says God created them, men and woman, He created them. And normally the idea is that men and women were created, but what some scholars say, which is what Blavatsky also is saying, is that they were creating men and women, man and woman at the same time. This hermaphrodite origin of humanity is present in many traditions. You see many gods that are half male and half female, for example. But that is a detail for what we want to talk about now, so we'll leave that behind. So then it says, they, the moon gods, went each on his allotted land, 7 of them, each on his lot. So these angels, the call for creation came forth, and these angels, the lords of the moon, follow that. Now there is another set of angels that are called the lords of the flame. But the lords of the flame remain behind. They would not go, they would not create. So the call for creation came forth. A group of angels obeyed, and another group of angels refused to go and create. And this is the first rebellion, which you can see in many traditions. In Hinduism, you have the idea of the Suras and Asuras. The Asuras are the demons, the Suras are the gods. And there is the idea of a rebellion. There is always, in most traditions, a group of angels that have like free thinking. There are some angels that are passive. They just follow the law. And there is a different set of angels that they have like free will. They have some kind of free will. And they are normally seen as rebellious angels. So Blavatsky relates these two kinds of angels with a concept that is in Hinduism, the idea of Pitris. Pitris means ancestors. And in Hinduism there is the idea, the word Pitri is used in several ways. If you talk about your ancestors in your own family, those are part of your Pitris. But also there is this myth that there were two kinds of, let's say, wise people. Some of them were always observed the religious traditions. They kept the sacred fire always alight. And then there were others that they did not keep on the tradition, and they didn't keep this fire alive. So you have the Barhishats, which are some kind of ancestors of humanity that were obedient, and then you have the Agnishvatas, that they were not obedient in that way. If you read the Puranas, which is one of the sources for this, there are different explanations of what the Barhishas and Agnishvatas are. But I'm giving an explanation that is the one that Blavatsky uses here. And she says there are 7 classes of Pitris, of these ancestors of humanity, 3 incorporeal and 4 corporeal. And there are 2 kinds, the Agnishvatas and the Barhishats. And then she says, esoteric philosophy explains the difference between the natures of these 2 classes. The Agnisvata Pitris are devoid of fire. Now she said fire represents the power of creation, but the power of physical creation. So she says there are a set of angels that are devoid of the ability of creating on the physical plane, because they are too divine and pure. Whereas the other class, the Barhishats, being the lunar Pitris, were more closely connected with Earth, and they became the creative Elohim that I mentioned, of form, or the atom of dust. So Blavatsky says there are these two angels. Some of them were lower, and because they were closer to matter, they were able to manipulate matter, and they were able to generate physical forms. These other angels, they were more spiritual, and they were unable to create physical forms. They were so far removed from matter that they weren't able to do that. So the angels that refused are actually the higher angels. And you see a resemblance of this in the Christian tradition, because it is said that Lucifer was the best of the angels, like one of the highest angels, that was the one that fell. So you see that the rebellion is associated to angels that are superior, and the obedience is related to lower angels. So Blavatsky says that the Barhishats, these lower angels, although they possess the creative fire, they were devoid of a higher, and she used the word Mahat, which means like divine wisdom, or the universal mind. So they were not so much in touch with the universal mind, and they had a physical power of creation. Being on the level of, with the lower principles, with the physical and the emotional aspect of human beings, they could only give birth to the outer man, to the physical man, or rather to the model, this etheric double that we were talking about. So you have these lower angels, they are able to create, but only the atom of dust. There is the idea that there are, in the Genesis, you have two chapters explaining how humanity was created, and they are completely different. In one, Adam is created out of the clay, and then the animals were created afterwards, and Adam was, naming them. And in the other chapter of the Genesis, all the animals are created first, and then God was not really pleased with that, and he decides to create humanity afterwards. So you have two different accounts. And the idea is that one is related to the physical aspect of humanity, the other is related to the spiritual aspect of humanity. So the first thing that is created is the physical aspect of humanity, a physical being which is still devoid of a soul. You have this also, by the way, in the Gnostic tradition. In their myths, they say that because this Yaldabaoth, which is the name that they use for Jehovah, for the creative God, because this God was limited, was low, he was able to create human beings, but devoid of a soul, very similar to this that Blavatsky is saying. And these human beings were kind of worms that they weren't able to stand up, they weren't able to think. So then Sophia, seeing that, and Sophia, by the way, is the mother of Yaldabaoth, seeing this, she went and put the divine spark in each human being. So Sophia here represents the higher angels, and Yaldabaoth represents these lower angels. So then Blavatsky says that these Anishvatas, although they are devoid of the grosser creative fire, and therefore they are unable to create the physical human being, because they don't have this etheric double that we were talking about, they remain, she says, these are in the exoteric allegories of Hinduism, they are the Kumaras. The Kumaras are a group of of devas, let's say, of angels or gods, that they were asked by Brahma, the god in Hinduism, or in this particular account, they were asked to go and populate the earth, but they were yogis that they spent all their time in meditation, and they thought that going into earth and assuming a physical form was something that was too low for them. So out of pride, they said, we are not going to do this. And again, they rebelled against the will of the god out of pride in this particular account. But the esoteric interpretation is that they could never create something physical because they were too spiritual. They didn't even have or a lower nature. And Blavatsky says these Kumaras are the ones that became the rebels, the Asuras, fighting and opposing the gods. So here you have also this idea of the rebellion in heaven. And then she explains, but agreeably to esoteric interpretation, this rebellion was a self-sacrifice for the benefit of humanity. The rebels would not create willless, irresponsible men, as the obedience angel did, nor could they endow human beings with only the temporary reflections of their own attributes. For even the latter, belonging to another and so much higher plane of consciousness, would leave man still irresponsible, hence interfere with any possibility of a higher progress. This is a complex concept, but the first point here to see, and we are going to go deeper into this, is that Blavatsky says this rebellion is not only a natural rebellion, they could not create physical human beings, but also it entails an act of self-sacrifice, because had they gone and tried to give human beings whatever they could give, then human beings would have stayed forever irresponsible, forever like devoid of freedom, of free will. And we are going to see why, but let us start setting the stage for that. So she says, no spiritual and psychic, in the sense of psychological evolution, is possible on earth, the lowest and most material plane, for one who, on that plane, is inherently perfect and cannot accumulate either merit or demerit. Man, remaining the pale shadow of the inert, immutable, motionless perfection, would have been doomed to pass through life on earth as in a heavy, dreamless sleep, hence a failure on this plane. So the idea is this: you have a new humanity that is just created. These higher angels, they could endow humanity with a soul. Now, the soul, in a very pure body that is just created, that soul in that body would have prevented the body from doing anything wrong, because the soul itself at the beginning of evolution is perfect. So you will have a soul that is perfect in a body that is just a passive vehicle of consciousness, and humanity would have stayed stationary in that state. A human being that is like a child with an inherent purity, but no evolution going on. What was needed is to let humanity develop a mind, to let humanity develop a will of its own, and then the soul coming into an active human being, using this human being to learn, to experience the world, but with this power of freedom of thought that was already developed. You know, at the beginning of humanity, we were more closer to animals than to human beings, and we started having all kinds of experiences. And by doing wrong and doing well, we begin to generate a mind and a willpower. Willpower or freedom is based on freedom of choice. You have to be able to choose between good and evil. If you are intrinsically good and you cannot choose, then there is no possibility of evolution, not possibility of development of freedom, of free will. So what these angels did is they waited until humanity developed without really the influence of the wisdom that is in the soul. And once humanity developed this free will, then they endowed humanity with a spiritual spark, with the soul. It's a complex subject, but we are going to go little by little into this. So she said, hence, as the higher angels had no hand in this physical creation, we find the primeval man issued from the bodies of the spiritually fireless progenitors from these lower angels, described as mindless. He had no middle principle to serve as the medium between the highest and the lowest. This middle principle is the development of what we call the psyche, the emotions and the mind. The soul needs to connect to the body through the mind. So if humanity didn't develop first a mind, then the soul could never really express itself through the body. So at the beginning, humanity was kind of animal. It didn't have a mind because the soul was not there present, and it didn't have an active soul. So it was more or less like an animal. And it says the spark, the divine spark, that is the monad, incarnated in these empty shells that were the bodies and remained unconscious. So then we are approaching the time when these angels that refuse to create or to participate in creation, now they will become active. So it says, how did the Manasa, the sons of wisdom, act? And this is referring to the angels. They rejected the self-born, that is like the first human being that appeared on earth. They are not ready. They spurned the first sweat-born. These are all technical names for like the second evolutionary stage of the human beings. They are not quite ready. They would not enter in the first egg-born, that is the beginning of the third evolutionary stage that we call root races. When the sweat-born produced the egg-born, the twofold, the twofold are this male and female race that was at the beginning. When that was produced, the lords of wisdom said, now shall we create. So what is shown here is that there are 3 evolutionary cycles, or 2.5, the beginning of the third one, that was necessary for human beings to develop the animal nature and also an instinctive mind. And then when that was developed, then these angels said, now is the time. Now is the time where we can come and complete the human being and give the human being a soul. And it says the third race became the vehicle of the lords of wisdom, of these Manasaputras, these Agnisvatas. So what is it that the angels did? These higher angels said, the sons of wisdom, ready for rebirth, came down. They saw the intellectually vile form of the third root race, and some of those angels said, we can choose, we have wisdom. So you have these angels that first refused to create, and that was correct. If they had gone and endowed humanity with a soul at that time, then we would have just like robots, because humanity had not developed a free will of its own. Now, when humanity is ready to have the incarnation of a soul, Some of them enter in the bodies. Some of the angels actually incarnated in human beings. This is another fall of the angels. So you can interpret the first fall of the angels would be when this group of angels refused to follow the orders of the Lord. They were rebellious. But this fall was a right fall, in the sense that we saw that it's right not to participate there. Now there is a second fall, that is the angels incarnate in human beings. So some of the human beings at the beginning of humanity were actually angels incarnated. And these angels become like, in all traditions they have the idea that they are the pharaohs or they are leaders were demigods. All traditions talk about this golden age in which the gods were walking among men. Because the first human beings that led the nascent humanity were actually these angels incarnated. And when we talk about this with the word angels, it sounds quite weird, because our ideal of angels are these little beings with wings. But angels are actually spiritual entities who are co-workers of nature. They are helping nature to develop. So some of these angels, they actually incarnated. They fell into earth. They become embodied. They become crucified to matter. But that was a self-sacrifice to lead the nascent humanity. Otherwise, we would have taken far longer to evolve. Sometimes we say, how did we discover everything? Fire, agriculture, what to eat, what not to eat. And in science, normally we think it's by trial and error. But that is something, if you really think about it, is something that is very hard to take, that we learned everything we learned just by trial and error. In the esoteric traditions, it is always said, there is guidance. There are the evolution in a new planet always attracts certain beings that will help with that evolution. So some of them helped, or incarnated. Then it said, some projected a spark. So some angels did not incarnate in human beings. They only projected a spark. And we are going to see that. And then, and some deferred the incarnation or even the projection of a spark until the fourth race, until the next evolutionary cycle. Some of the angels said, no, these are nasty forms. I don't want to go there. I don't want to have anything to do with this. Let nature evolve them a little more, and then in the next evolutionary cycle, I'll go and help. So there is a group that incarnated. There is another group that sent a spark, and there is another group that refused. So those who received but a spark remained destitute of higher knowledge. Those who the angels incarnated, they were wise. Those who received a spark began to develop a spiritual consciousness, little by little. And the spark burned low. But the third class, the human beings that didn't receive a spark or didn't receive an incarnation, they remained mindless. Their monads were not ready. And they became the narrow-headed. Those who were ready, those who entered into human beings, became the first, what we call masters of wisdom, the first enlightened beings that were the ones that guided humanity. Those who were half ready and received only a spark, what these human beings received is like the germ of the spiritual nature. It's like the seed. Now this spiritual nature has to be, in the course of evolution, has to be developed. This is the bulk of humanity. This is most of us. At the beginning of human evolution, most of us received the seed of the spiritual nature, and our work is to develop it, to unfold it, to make it flourish. Those human beings in which the angel incarnated, they became the guides of the bulk of humanity. Those who received the spark, they became the regular humanity that are us. And On the other hand, those who, jealous of their intellectual freedom, a freedom that is beyond, the prison of matter, they said, we can choose, we have wisdom, and they incarnated far later, but they received a karmic punishment for this, or they had prepared a karmic punishment for this. The idea is that all that, those bodies of human beings that should have received a spark, when an angel projects a spark, there is, in some way that is not really explained, that angel remains tied to that human being. And sometimes the idea of the guardian angels is related to this. So for the angels, whether to incarnate or to project a spark, that implied to come down from their heavenly realm, where everything is bliss, everything is peace, everything is perfect, to come down to the earth realm and be engaged in the human evolution. So this is why a group of angels didn't want to do that. But then, because those bodies remained with no soul, those bodies degenerated, they couldn't keep up evolving, and then the angels were forced to incarnate in these far less evolved bodies. And according to Blavatsky, many of the people that are troublemakers in human history, they come from these angels that didn't take their responsibility, and that they took bodies that were far less developed, spiritually speaking, and then there is a stanza that says, and they will suffer and cause suffering. So this is the explanation why some human beings are good, some human beings are perfect, some other human beings seem to be, bad or not as good as others. So this is an allegorical explanation of what happened. So this is the final step, seeing the sin committed with the animals. The idea is that these human bodies, which were not really human because they didn't have a soul, they began to reproduce themselves with animals, and the progeny developed these bodies that were far inferior, but then the angels had to incarnate in those bodies and start trying to help those bodies evolve. So when these angels saw that problem that was going on, the sin committed with the animals, they wept, saying, "The mindless have defied our future abodes. This is karma. Let us dwell in the others. Let us teach them better, lest worse should happen." And they did, and then all became endowed with manas, with the soul. They saw the sins of the mindless. So eventually this other group of the angels did what they should do, but it was already kind of late and they had to pay for that. So this is a third fall of the angels, if you will. In this case, it was a mistake. So you see the first fall of the angels, the rebellion to the first calling for creation, that wasn't a mistake. The second one, incarnating or projecting the spark, this is a fall into matter, that wasn't a mistake. But the second rebellion, the rebellion of those who should have incarnated, that was a mistake. So if anything, talking about the fall of the angels, we could, in the way that Christians normally think of it, it could refer to this third, thing that happened. So I know that this is complex, and because anything you take from the secret doctrine is complex, I could explain this without referring to the secret doctrine, and then it's a little, it can be a little smoother. But since most people here were members, I thought that it is good to start getting in touch with the language of the secret doctrine and the imagery that it provides. So this is, I think we can stop here. There are, of course, many details around. This is a fascinating story, but I think we can stop here and go to question and answers or comments about this. Does anybody want to ask something or comment? Or so were you familiar with this story before? No? for the most part. This is all in the second volume of The Secret Doctrine that explains how humanity is created. And, you know, if we have time, there are many lines from here that Blavatsky intended to explain why the world is the way it is from several points of view. You know, there are, in this little story, if we could elaborate on different aspects, we could see why the origin of evil, why there are certain tendencies in humanity that are different, why, you know, several of the problems that we see.
Thanks. One of the things that strikes me about a part of your explanation of the allegory is that in each case where something is said about like the angels refusing to do something or something of that nature, it was actually that they weren't in a position to do so, or in fact it wouldn't be the right thing to do, as though there is no, not only is there no accident, but also there is no right and wrong here. I mean, the use of the concepts right and wrong is itself a kind of allegory. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not really, it's just that they were not in a position to do that, or it wouldn't be the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And so it's like there's no accident and there are no mistakes in nature, really. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and actually even this third option, where these angels didn't incarnate or projected a spark, in one of the slokas it says the divine sparks of those bodies were not ready, were not ready to receive the spark of the angels. So even in that case, it may very well be that those divine sparks, the angels refused, not out of pride or something, but because those bodies, or the divine spark that was overshadowing those bodies, were not really ready to receive the soul, the manasic element. So I have the tendency to see all this in that way, that everything is part of a process of evolution that acts according to laws. And when we have to explain this, we explain it in an allegorical way, but this is really something that has to do with how evolution works. And the rebels are not really rebels, and this mistake is not really a mistake. I think one of the teachings of this particular allegory, when depicting these angels doing something wrong in not incarnating, I think there is a hidden intention there, which you have to dig a little more to get the teaching behind. But you see, these angels were spiritual beings. They were in this state of bliss, they were spiritual, and what was needed at that time is for the angels to become material, for the angels to become embodied. So at the beginning of evolution, there is a need to become more material. And if you go against what evolution is supposed to do at the time, whatever goes against that is something that is relatively wrong. So at the beginning of evolution, the aspiration to be spiritual was wrong. You see, these angels didn't want to incarnate because they wanted to be spiritual. So at the beginning of evolution, the right thing to do is to be material, to be more denser. At this point in evolution, in the Theosophical view of evolution, it proceeds like in a U-shape kind of shape, in a U-shaped way. So at the beginning, from the spiritual, things begin to be more and more material, and then the material has to come back to a spiritual state. And there is a deep reason why this happens in that way, that we cannot go into right now. But the point here, I think, interesting is that right and wrong are always relative. Going along with whatever evolution is trying to do at the time is the right action. Going against it is the wrong action, all in quotation marks. And sometimes the right action may be to be spiritual, and sometimes that may be the wrong action. So, it brings far more nuances to this idea of right and wrong.
I haven't read widely yet, but I was under the understanding that we came from different planet Palladiums and Cyruses and different other planets.
Mm-hmm.
So this is saying something different, or is it that and
Yeah. Yeah, not in the Theosophical model. From a certain point of view, you can see any model is just that. It's a way to explain things. In the way that the Theosophical explanation of how things start is presented, there is not much room for other planets. There is some. Actually, all these angels come from previous evolutions that took place on other places. So, for example, the Lords of the Moon, these are angels that came from the evolution, according to the Theosophical teachings, at a time when the Moon was a planet. That the evolution on the Moon already finished, the planet died, now it's just a satellite of the Earth, that the Earth was like the progeny of the Moon in a certain sense. And so the Lords of the Moon come from that evolution. Then you have some of the Lords of the Flame, this other group of angels. It is said that some of them come from an evolution that was going on in Venus that was far more advanced than the one on Earth. So there is a little room for entities coming within the solar system, but in the Theosophical view, the solar system is a body, and all the planets and each one of us are like cells of the body. So normally things are, in this view, quite self-contained. This happens within because the solar logos, the solar deity, is in charge of this particular portion of the universe that is the solar system. So there is not much room for the intervention from other galaxies or solar systems. But again, these things, we have to take them allegorically. We will not know the truth when we get initiated, by the master. So all these teachings are allegorical because the real truth has to be experienced in higher states of consciousness. So if you take the Theosophical approach, then yes, there is no room for other galaxies or things like that.
That's a lot to take in. But somehow I feel that we have the seed of that truth, which maybe can be recognised in some way through our chakra system and our breathing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, something just tells me that that's, as above so below,
Mm-hmm.
that we contain the seed of understanding, which can be brought out, through our chakra systems, or that relates to it.
Yeah, well, that is what Blavatsky wants us to do, because the universe has this holographic nature, as above, so below. And Blavatsky always encouraged the students to draw correspondences. So if you have the feeling that there is some kind of correspondence there, it would be great if you try to work it out. Even if you don't get to work it out completely, but you find some connections. That is actually how we grow, and our understanding and our ability to conceive these spiritual subjects, how we develop that ability, by making the effort to draw our own correspondences. So she always said, each student has to create his or her own system based on the teachings.
I'm just thinking of a parallel with Jesus, who taught the disciples the secrets, but to the people he spoke in parables. Mm-hmm. And this is like a large parable, mm-hmm. A big problem for the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And at what point does intelligence come into this?
Yes, there are evidences in many places in the Gospels that Jesus taught the disciples in private things that he didn't talk to the people, and all we have in the Gospels is what he taught to the people, not what he taught in secret. And that is the case in every religion. As humanity evolves intellectually, then more and more of those teachings that originally were secret are given, but there is always far more than what can be actually given to humanity. And in any case, even if the most esoteric teaching is given in words, it has very little power. I mean, I guess the most esoteric of all the teachings is we are all one, and we are saying it, but that is just a bundle of words. You know, the perception of the oneness is when we really know the truth that is esoteric, not because somebody is not saying it, but because it cannot be said. You know, all we can do is just to say words. So the intelligence is, I think, there, and by intelligence, I suppose you are not referring simply to intellectual intelligence, but a real spiritual intelligence is this ability to begin to perceive this truth that the words are only pointers to.
Seem to be some interesting questions about timescales here. You're not saying much about timescales.
Yeah, I didn't want to introduce that, but I can. Blavatsky said that the first incarnation of the angels, when they came and endowed humanity with a soul, was 18 million years ago.
Yes, because there are such interesting articles appearing with what some people see as fringe archaeology, with remnants of humans, the footprints and so on turning up. For one thing, the sizes are enormous, such as that enormous footprint in southern Africa. And then there are the footprints which appear in geological strata along with the dinosaurs. And I'm going to form an opinion now that these footprints must have been people very much at the head of, at the start of great athleticism.
Yeah, Blavatsky says that the first races of human beings were contemporary of the last dinosaurs, and actually their sizes, the sizes of the human beings, were more or less of the same size as the dinosaurs. And you can see that even in the Bible or in the book of Enoch, when the angels had intercourse with the women, it says that the race that was generated was a race of giants, because the first humanity was giants. And you see in the Bible that there was an age of the giants, and then when the next evolutionary cycle began, people were smaller, and for a while the two were interlapping. And the story of David and Goliath, this is the time where giants from the previous evolutionary cycle and the new cycle were still overlapping to some extent. And you see in Greek there is the idea of the Titans, also giants. So yes, all the first race of human beings were really tall. And there are some evidences, very few, because in the Theosophical view, the continents that these races were inhabiting, now they sunk, they are under the sea. So most of the remnants will be at the bottom of the sea. But there are a few places, like in Africa and some other few places where that land was part of the previous continent. So
you talked about the several forms of the angels, and I'm quite intrigued by the first couple, where initially the angels fell fully into human incarnation, into humanity. And the second one, just a spark of the angel became human. And it's interesting to speculate on what course of evolution both those different forms took. So can you enlighten us?
Well, the angels that incarnated completely, they became the leaders of humanity that were at the same time, they were actually adepts. You see in all traditions there is this idea of the golden age, where they are leaders, they were demigods, they had psychic powers, they had a lot of wisdom, they could do anything. These are those celestial beings that incarnated as human beings. And you have it also in the idea of the avatars in different traditions. The avatars are celestial beings. They are not really human beings evolving. They come from previous evolutions. So celestial beings that take human form to guide humanity. So all the guides of humanity come from this incarnation of the angels. And the bulk of humanity, all of us, we are like this, the sons of the angels. This spark is what develops into our own soul. And so the bulk of humanity is formed by the sparks that the angels projected into us. So we are all baby angels.
Well, thank you very much, Pablo.
Thank you, everybody.
I've been some of these stanzas a few times, and I've got to admit they're very complex and confusing. And I wish I'd come to some of your talks a few years ago, and I would have saved myself a lot of heartache. But you have shed a lot of light on what is quite a difficult and complex topic. So, on behalf of everyone here tonight, thank you very much. And you're welcome back any time at our